PowerPoint. So kinks and inflections as temporal markers in flattening an epidemic curve. So recently, we've been in quarantine because of the pandemic. So it becomes relevant to study the mathematics behind this. So the purpose of this small paper, little paper, is to review the math behind modeling an epidemic curve. And the abstract, if you can see this, may natatakpan yung ano eh, ng masyadong malaki. Natatakpan ba yung abstract ng mga mukha natin? Hindi naman, ano? So a certain amount of time after the implementation of intervention, the outbreak will respond to measures by the government. Halimbawa, no? If they implement social distancing, wearing of masks, okay, interventions to curtail the spread of the virus. Mathematically, this will change the slope of the pandemic curve. And that's something that physicist is well trained too hard to study, because we are always using slope, calculus, inflection points, local maxima, local minima in our study. So the purpose of this is just to reveal those little things, how calculus describes a pandemic curve and how to flatten it and what are the signals. In particular, kinks. Kinks are discontinuities in slope. Okay, so if there is a kink, it means that something was done a few weeks before. So the curve changed abruptly its slope because there was an intervention in the past, usually 14 days, because that's the incubation period of viri. Okay, and we can quantify that because we can model the growth of an epidemic by an exponential or sometimes sub-exponential if it is not as fast spreading. A power function can also model the spread of the virus. But eventually, when the population is being saturated already, many have already acquired the disease, or maybe there is a vaccine already, so the number of susceptibles will be smaller if there is a vaccine, or maybe people are sleeping better because of the ECQ, more sleep, better health, and of course the constant reminder of social distancing and minimum health standards can also improve the immune system of the populace. So those things will curb the growth, okay, decrease the slope, and hopefully, as soon as possible, flatten the curve. So we are always after flattening the curve. I will not really go into the details of epidemiology because I am not trained in that profession. I will just review the basic math. So there is this SIR model. SIR model is one of the most used model in epidemiology. S means susceptibles. The I, the italic I there, or Gothic I, is infectives. Ibig sabihin, carriers of the disease, infectives. And then R are the removed portion of the population. Removed means either you have died because of the disease, hindi ka na binibilang, or you have recovered. Yun. Kaya SIR model, SIR. Susceptibles are those who can be infected. Infectives are those who are already infected and carrying it around. They're the dangerous ones. They're the active cases according to DOH. And then yung R, those are the removed from the population because they died or they have recovered. Yan ang ating model na those are the basic models. So this symbol that I am using, this script script I, or looks like a tau, that's the symbol for infectives. So the change in infectives will be the infectives tomorrow, or D plus 1, minus the infectives today. So basically, it's a delta infectives. And that is proportional to a certain factor called S and P. S is a social exposure parameter, may be defined as the average number of people coming into contact with or being exposed to an infected individual. Yung P naman is the probability that your exposure to an infective will lead to an actual disease or infection. So it depends on many things like your immune system, etc. And obviously, the next day's number of infectives is 1 plus S times P times the previous day's number of infectives. This is the reason why it becomes exponential, because the number of cases, active cases on a given day, is a multiple of the previous one. If the multiple is more than 1, then we have, for example, if it's 2, then it's a doubling every day. It's doubling every day. And that's one of the parameters. If you rewrite that in differential form, this becomes a first-order differential equation familiar to many physicists, which is quickly solvable by an exponential. I can't see. Our faces are obscuring the PowerPoint. Sige. Lipat uli natin sa kanan. Okay. Nagsisiksikan sila pag nagpo-full screen ako. Maybe I should not go full screen. Ayan, ganyan na lang. Lakihan ko na lang. Ano? Okay. So, ganyan na lang para makita natin. Okay. I still have about 5 minutes, right? Or 10 minutes ba? Dito na lang sa kaliwa. May...
Bali, you have, ano oras ba? 3:16. Hanggang, ubusin mo na yung hanggang 3:30. So, you have 15 minutes.
Pa. Okay.
30 minutes, kasi 20 minutes yung lecture, 10 minutes ang question and answer. Ubusin mo na.
Okay, sige. Good. So there, a while ago it looked like an incremental equation, but if you translate that into calculus, yung delta infectives becomes a derivative in time, and the factor is 1 over the period, the characteristic time of that particular spreading virus, multiplied by the previous number of infectives of the previous time. So, ibig sabihin, as you know very well, this equation defines an exponential, because an exponential is the only function whose derivative is itself. Of course, the chain rule gives you the 1 over tau in the denominator of the exponent. And kaya naging interested ako rito kasi sabi ko, oh, these things are familiar in physics. Maybe epidemiology can be studied by a physicist. Okay, so that's why I am here for some reason. And I am quite enjoying the math that they are presenting. Okay, with that, the problem is exponentials are always overestimating. Kaya in the beginning, it's good to pattern it after yung explosion of the virus or spreading exponentially. But because people respond, the community will respond immediately, even by word of mouth. They will hear about the news na, oh, there is a Wuhan outbreak. So they become aware and they become careful. They will naturally segregate themselves from each other. So the exponential is no longer a good description of the expansion or the dispersion. Something slower than an exponential is more appropriate. And we call those functions sub-exponential. They can be represented by uh, a decaying, slightly decaying exponential, not as fast as an exponential, because according to math, the exponential is the unbeatable function when it comes to increase, because its rate of increase is proportional to itself. And in that way, I have used here in my manuscript, instead of an exponential growth, which is unrealistic in life for epidemics, instead of that, I use a power function like t to the power 9 or t to the power 8, depending on the on the numbers early in the outbreak. The power can be determined by Excel very quickly. So it's a power law. Here is the function, which is a power of p. P is determined by through the numbers from the data of the outbreak. You will fit, you know how to do this in Excel. You will fit uh, the power function with the numbers given by DOH, and you will determine P. But you cannot do that for the later cases, because that will increase to infinity. Maubos yung population. Time will come when the number of susceptibles will decrease kasi na-infect na sila lahat. The number of infectives will also increase, and the number of recoveries will also adjust, but the sum will always be the total population, N. S naught is the initial number of susceptibles. Usually in the beginning, lahat naman tayo susceptibles. So that's almost equal to the number of population. 105 million ba tayo sa Pilipinas. So that's the entire population of the Philippines in the beginning. But as the virus spreads, the number of susceptibles will decrease kasi dumadami yung infectives. And then later on, pag may namatay, dadagdag yun sa R, the remove, or the recoveries. So these three are always balancing each other, but the total number is the total number of population. Unfortunately, nung umuwi yung mga OFWs, nadagdagan din yung N. Okay? So medyo nasira yung model natin doon. Pero sige, let's move on. So here are the set of equations that will govern the SIR model. The change in susceptibles is negative because it's decreasing, but it is proportional to the product of the susceptibles and the infectives. Kung walang infectives, edi wala ring magbabago sa number of susceptibles. But the minus sign means it is decreasing because people are getting infected. Now, equation 8, you have here the change in the number of infectives is a positive number depending on this difference AS minus R, proportional to the number of infectives. Why AS minus R? Itong R kasi, this is the recovery parameter. No? AS, of course, is the number of susceptibles. The more population you have, like America, the more there will be greater increase in infectives because you have more susceptibles, parang maraming targets. And if they don't practice wearing masks and the minimum health standards, walang magre-recover sa kanila. So this minus R is almost minus zero. That's actually what's happening with large populations at the moment. And of course, you can see by now that there is a critical value here that will stop the infections spreading. If AS is equal to R, then this factor will be zero, and you have just flattened the curve. That's a very, very visible way of seeing this epidemic. How about the recoveries? The recoveries increase with number of infectives. Kung maraming nakakuha ng virus, of course, marami ring pwedeng ma-remove. And by remove, we mean, again, recovered or died. So R is a death rate, parang something proportional. And for tau less than Ti minus, I will define what Ti minus is. It's the first inflection. It is an exponential, but the exponent is now the AS naught minus R. This initial value of this factor that determines the expansion. Dito rin kinukuha yung pinag-aawayan nilang R naught. Okay? because R naught will determine whether we are surviving, we are sinking in the pandemic. Pero makikita na rin dito yon. We want this A as minus R to be 0. So there you are. That's the exponential increase, but for t less than a certain time, it is an exponentially increasing function. Doon naman sa for t greater than a certain ti plus, it will be an exponentially decreasing function. That's the model of SIR. But that's not exactly the model I will use. So if you set the number of infectives, the derivative of that to 0 at the beginning, you will be able to define the R naught. Ito yung araw-araw, everyday UP is presenting this in their website, yung COVID-19 website. Our R naught at the moment, I think, is about 1.6. It used to be 1.1, parang ganun. No? So it's getting a little worrying because this should be 1. 1 is the threshold, okay? And here is the formula that you can find from the above equation, equation 13. So as you can see, it's 1 plus something else. And this something else, if this is 0, we're okay. We are sustaining ourselves through the pandemic. But if the increase in susceptibles is large, itong factor na to, is a fractional increase in infectives divided by R, that's the problem. If this is positive, it's getting worse. We want this to become negative para R naught will go back to 0. And if you do the math, you will find that the number of infectives is given by this nice looking equation. I hope people will rederive this. It's probably already in the paper of the reference for SIR, but written in a different way. This I deduced from the 3 differential equations above. They're coupled, but they're first order. So you can solve for tau if you have the time and effort. Itong tatlong differential equations na to, 7, 8, and 9, can be decoupled and solved for tau infectives. Should call that I, infectives, script I. So I'm proud to have derived this during the pandemic, equation 14. Although it may be in the literature, I don't know. I will ask the students to find that. But that's how you find the infectives at any time from the susceptibles and the initial value of the infectives. Like in January 29, January 30, 2020, there was one Chinese foreigner, no? Tourist positive in COVID. So that was the first infective one. Okay. And then things spread from there. So you can also write the differential equations, rewrite the differential equation in second order form like this. The dot is our time derivative. So double dot means second derivative. If you look at these two equations, I separated the variables. Equation 16 only includes S, the number of susceptibles. Equation 17 only includes infectives. So they have been segregated. But if you will solve these equations, I'm sure the physicists amongst you, you know what to do. If you look at the special cases, you will find the exponentials. Okay, you will find the exponentials. So, and this is a first order differential equation that also is in the literature. Okay, let me move on to my proposed model. The proposed model is like this. Like this. So the change in infectives, previous one, this one. This is the model. I'd like to make that larger. Yeah. Equation 23 is the model I am proposing. I'm using in this manuscript. So yeah, no? Ano sabi dito? Alisin ko na itong equation 22 para malaki ito. There. Okay. So for time from 0 to a certain time of a kink when the slope abruptly changes, it is just 1 times a power function. I told you a while ago that a power function better fits the data instead of an exponential. An exponential overestimates the data all the time because the exponential is the fastest increasing function. But after the kink, I call this TK the time of the kink when the slope suddenly went down abruptly, then it will be a product of a power function, but now it is attenuated by this exponential. That word is familiar to physicists, attenuated by an exponential with a negative power here. So this is an exponential decay characterized by the decrease in the spread of the infectives. If you can imagine that, you have something like a very steep parabola, or maybe even a fourth power, ninth power uh, polynomial, monomial power function, and then multiplied by an exponential that decays very quickly. Together, they will have a hump. Very familiar to those who are studying quantum mechanics. The radial part of the wave function looks like that. Okay. So with that model, you can differentiate it. So you can find if you differentiate the two cases, before and after the kink, you have this. And after the kink, the derivative of that exponential, because it's a product, it looks like this. You can find the critical point from the second one because if you set the derivative to 0, you get critical points. And obviously, this difference here provides the critical value as a product of the power of the function, the power function, capital P, which is empirically determined, and the characteristic time of the decrease in susceptibles, infectives. Okay? So ito yung mga critical points. We're not interested in infinity. We're interested also in this P times tau greater. That's the math that reveals so many things. So it will tell you where the crest is, hence the symbol TC. Ibig sabihin yung pinakamataas na number of susceptibles, and hopefully we are already there. Hopefully. Then you can also find the second derivative. No, yeah. Graduate students of physics love to differentiate, and they're interested in the curvature as well as the first derivative. So many things can be seen from this. For example, the inflection points can be found from the second derivative. So I'll skip that because the manuscript details all of that uh, completely. So, okay. You can express the the second, you can express the dynamics of this model in a second order differential equation. Parang F equals ma, parang ano, it looks like an oscillator differential equation where you have an acceleration term here and then something that looks like a negative frequency squared, and then x again, parang Hooke's force. Okay, acceleration equals a certain constant times the displacement, parang ganon. But this is a matrix form because uh, the first column and row refers to before the kink, and then this corner here refers to after the kink, which is more important to our study. So the simplest cases are when p equals 0, 1, and 2. But it can be as large as 11, or in the case of COVID-19, p became something like 10 or 11. Then I normalize. So I will skip this normalization because, you know, physicists want to look at numbers instead of thousands and millions of infectives. Physicist is trained to look at a normalized number between 0 and 1. Okay? 1 means everybody and 0 means nobody. Ganun lang kami mag-isip. Very simple, from 0 to 1. So I normalize this so that you can talk about, instead of millions of Americans, thousands of Filipinos, 13,000, ganun. You can talk about 0 and 1, parang percentages na lang. But okay, that's just a detail. I'll skip the normalization because it makes use of gamma functions. Why gamma? Because the p is not necessarily an integer. So a binomial expansion of something raised to a power not an integer will require gamma functions. Okay? So medyo this requires a lot of explanation, but thanks to the physicists around, they're probably aware, very aware of these symbols. Okay, so that's the normalization constant after doing it carefully, and now I have the model normalized. Okay, let's look at the some of the things we can gather from this. You can solve for the characteristic time after the kink, and the characteristic the kink also can be expressed in terms of the number of infectives before the kink. You can do the math there quickly. This is a typical uh, fit, no, of the early data. When I wrote this paper, the data, when you put it in Excel, will reveal this best fit power function. So it's t to the power 10.774, and the coefficient is 10 to the minus 16. It will reveal many things like what is the characteristic time. So the power function looks like that, but that's before the kink. After the kink, you can calculate the position of the kink. The power is t point 10.774. T less is 30.553. That's a characteristic time, yung denominator dito sa power function, okay? Before the kink. After the kink, it will be different. The other two things that will mark the progression of the epidemic curve are inflection points. Yung pagka inflection points is where the second derivative is 0. Okay? First derivative is not 0, but the second derivative is 0. This is my definition here of inflection. In this case, if you calculate the first inflection, it is the point where the slope, instead of increasing, the slope begins to decrease. That's the transition from an increasing to a decreasing slope. But it's still positive. Dito naman sa t plus I, the second inflection, this actually happens after the crest. Pag nakalampas ka na dun sa maximum, you will find another inflection where the slope is decreasing before that time, t plus, but right after this time, the slope will already increase, but it's still pointing negative. I will give you a diagram in a moment, so you will see these places. So the data that was available then, gave me these numbers. No, I forgot what date that was when I submitted this. So I used the data before, and it was a simple graph because the graph then was we are not yet very advanced in our reporting. We cannot test too many people yet. The Bayanihan Act is still trying to implement itself. There are late cases, very late cases, so that's a problem. Day 60 is actually sometime parang March 29 yan, no? So April Fool, so day 60, that turns out to be the predicted kink where the slope suddenly decreased. So I consider day 60 as the kink during those times. And this is the equation that was revealed by Excel. Ano lang yan, best fit. And according to this, not that one. Parang hindi yata ito. Is that the last equation? Okay. I'll transition to my manuscript because I think the figures are not here. Ito yung figure. Okay, there's the figure. I hope you can see my figure here. Lalakihan ko na lang.
Yes, nakikita namin.
Okay, thank you. So I have 5 minutes pa. Ano pa lang 3:40.
You already exceeded 10 minutes of James of
Okay.
Jasper's time. Yan na
Okay,
si
Jasper.
Jasper.
Just give
Okay.
me 2 minutes. So here is my diagram. This is the kink at day 60. After the kink, there is a first inflection where the increasing slope started to decrease. Okay? I don't know how you will interpret that. Baka that's the beginning of the flattening, if you want, of the curve. And then there's a peak, day 118. And then after that, of course, the slope is now negative. So it cannot go all the way negative to zero. So it will start to recover here at the second inflection, day 154, and then asymptotically approach zero. When will you release the people in quarantine? Probably the second inflection or beyond that, para the slope is already on the way down. Two more figures. Oh, there's the PowerPoint. This one, the last figures. Wala. Wala yung figure. Desktop na lang. Eto. Okay, here is the renormalize. So what I did was, it's a combination of everything here. No? The yellow line is the, wait a minute. This brown line is the DOH number of cases. Brown line increasing. That's why it's very worrying. Tapos ito namang green, light green line curve is the DOH number of infectives. Kaya it's very worrying because it is increasing to the sky. This heavy green line is the number of recoveries. This flesh line, light orange, is the number of deaths. So deaths plus recoveries plus infectives equals the number of cases. Ang mapapansin nyo dyan, I have a renormalized version. So what I did was kasi they changed the way of reporting. There are late cases. They divided it into fresh and late cases. The fresh cases are 3 days old or more or less, and the late cases are 14 days old or more. So how do you appreciate that? Ang ginawa ko, I divided the fresh cases kasi they are 3 days old. I divided this into 3, divided by 3, and then throw them backwards in time. Similarly, yung 14 days old, I divided it by 21 and threw them backwards in time. And the result are these yellow things, this yellow and this orange things. They're not so worrying. In fact, the number of infectives seem to be tapering to a flat prediction according to a sixth order polynomial here. Fit. Okay? And last good news. This is the what is it? The rectified new cases. If you correct the data, if you account for the late reporting, ayan, parang we are at the peak at the moment. We have just crossed the peak. And day 186, ano ba yun? August 3 yata yun, something that. August 3, if we do everything perfectly well, like perfect compliance, 100% compliance to the safety protocols, then we might be able to end this pandemic on August 3 if everyone will be extremely careful. Yun lang. Okay, can I end here?